Hello everyone, and welcome to another video. Today we are going to be talking about the House of Burgesses. We're also going to be talking about other ways that the Virginia Company was involved in the early colonies in America. But we're going to start off by talking about the House of Burgesses. The Virginia Company also granted political reforms. In 1619 it allowed the planters to create the House of Burgesses, the first representative body in colonial America. Male landowners could elect two leaders known as burgesses to represent their settlement in the colonial government. The House of Burgesses had the power to make laws and raise taxes. It began a strong tradition of representative government in the English colonies. Now, if you are aware of the makeup of our current government, this might sound familiar to you, where each settlement can elect two leaders to go to this place to represent them. Where else do we have two people from each settlement, or let's call them states instead? Where else do we have two people from each state that are elected by the people of that state to go and represent them? That's how the Senate is set up. You know, the current Senate that we still have today. It can trace its this pattern is present here in this House of Burgesses. Expansion in Virginia creates conflict. As the colonists expanded their tobacco plantations, they took more land from the American Indians, who became enraged. In 1622, Opicano, we're gonna call him Opicano, led a surprise attack that burned plantations and killed nearly a third of the colonists. So this guy goes on an absolute warpath rampage, and rightfully so. All of these people from a world away are just flooding in here, and they're taking land that used to be yours and your ancestors and everything that you've ever known, and he is going on a warpath against them. The Algonquin Indians fight back, but counterattacks by the colonial survivors destroyed the Indian villages and their crops, reducing the Indians to starvation. Defeated, Opicano made peace in 1632. The victors took more land and spread their settlements northward to the Potomac River. With English settlements expanding, yet another war broke out between the colonists and American Indians. In 1644, intense fighting killed hundreds of colonists and thousands of Indians, including Opicano. Disease and war reduced the Virginia Algonquins from 24,000 in 1607 to only 2,000 by 1670. So this resulted in a lot of deaths for a lot of Native Americans. Of course, a lot of colonists died in this time too. So this was an intense fighting. And the leader that started it all, Opicano, he's going to die in all of this fighting as well. Okay, next topic is Bacon's Rebellion. As the population of Virginia increased, settlers moved onto less fertile lands in the interior, where it cost more to transport their crops to market. They also faced greater danger from American Indians angered by their intrusion. The royal governor of Virginia, William Berkeley, worsened the growing crisis. Berkeley levied heavy taxes on the planters and used the proceeds to reward a few favorites from the wealthiest class, which dominated the House of Burgesses. He also expressed contempt for a free press and public education for common people. So this guy, William Berkeley, he is the governor of Virginia. He is appointed by the Queen. He is not well liked in the colonies. He's going to pass a bunch of heavy taxes on the farmers, and all of the money that he makes from those taxes are just going to go right into his pocket and his buddies' pockets. He's against a free press, which what that means is it's freedom of information. You know, news people, journalists. He was against the journalists being able to get out there, see the news and report it. He was against that. And he was against public education for common people, meaning that, like our school, like Magnolia, he would be against Magnolia, saying that the common people, your everyday people, they're not super wealthy, they don't need to be educated. They shouldn't be educated. That's the kind of guy this guy was. Not a great guy. In 1675, war erupted between the American Indians and the settlers in the Potomac Valley. The settlers wanted to exterminate all of the colony's Indians. When Berkeley balked, the settlers rebelled under the leadership of the ambitious and reckless Nathaniel Bacon. To popular acclaim, Bacon's men slaughtered American Indians, peaceful as well as hostile. When Berkeley protested, Bacon marched his armed followers to Jamestown in a revolt called Bacon's Rebellion. In September 1676, they drove out the governor and burned the town. A month later, however, Bacon died suddenly of disease, and his rebellion collapsed. Berkeley regained power, but the rebellion had undermined his credibility. In 1677, the king appointed a new governor, and Berkeley returned to England. So, Berkeley was not, while he was not a great guy, he was not in favor of just going to war with the natives and trying to kill them all. Well, that's what Nathaniel Bacon and his followers wanted to do, and they did. And then, whenever Berkeley came out against them, Bacon decides to go invade Berkeley. So he and his men, they go to Jamestown and run the governor out of town. And a few years pass and Bacon dies, but he had already made his mark. He made his impact, and people are starting to see, well, maybe Berkeley didn't know exactly what he was talking about. So in 1677, the king appoints a new governor to Virginia, and Berkeley returns to England. Bacon's rebellion showed that poor farmers would not tolerate a government that catered only to the wealthiest colonists. The colony's leaders reduced the taxes paid by the farmers and improved their access to frontier land. But that frontier policy provoked further wars with the American Indians of the interior. So the super wealthy are looking at this, they're like, oh wow, these people are serious. Maybe we should start, treating them fairly. Maybe not being huge jerks to the poor people. So that's what they started to do, and they say, you can go into the frontier land. Well, what's in the frontier land? Oh, the Native Americans are there. The ones that are trying to protect their land from you expanding into them. So that's just going to cause more conflict. Expansion in Virginia creates conflict. Colonists tried to remove Virginia Governor William Berkeley from office as part of Bacon's rebellion. So that's what this picture is here. These are Bacon's men, and they're confronting the governor. England expands its southern colonies. Virginia was the first of the southern colonies to be settled. During the 17th and 18th century, England established the southern colonies of Maryland, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. And we're going to talk about them. Here is a map of what those colonies look like at this time. Now, North Carolina and South Carolina, whenever they were first settled, it was just Carolina. There wasn't a North Carolina and South Carolina. It was all just one state altogether. Kind of like how Virginia and West Virginia used to be just Virginia. Well, North Carolina and South Carolina used to just be called Carolina. Maryland becomes a colonial refuge. In 1632, at the northern head of Chesapeake Bay, the English king established a second southern colony, named Maryland. The name honored Mary, the queen of the new monarch, Charles I, son of James. Charles gave Maryland to a favorite aristocrat, Lord Baltimore, who owned and governed it as a proprietary colony. Lord Baltimore founded Maryland as a colonial refuge for his fellow Catholics, who were discriminated against in England by the Protestant majority. Contrary to Lord Baltimore's hopes, however, more Protestants than Catholics immigrated to Maryland. Relationships between the two groups, deteriorated into armed conflict later in the century. So, this guy, Lord Baltimore, he comes to America and he founds Maryland. He's like, yes, this will be a place where myself, a Catholic, and all of my fellow Catholics can come here and get away from all those nasty Protestants. Well, guess who moves in? All the Protestants. So he goes clear across the Atlantic Ocean to try to get away from the Protestants, and they follow him there. So it's kind of funny how that worked out. England expands its southern colonies. This is modern-day Charleston, South Carolina, and this was settled by the English colony of Charles. This was settled as the English colony of Charlestown. Excuse me. The city was a center of trade and commerce by 1739. England settles in the Carolinas. In 1670, the English established a new colony on the coast, north of Florida but south of Virginia, called Carolina, to honor King Charles II. The new colony included present-day North Carolina and South Carolina. The first settlement and capital was Charlestown, also named to honor the king. Carolina officially belonged to a group of English aristocrats, the Lords Proprietary, who remained in England, entrusting the colony's leadership to ambitious men from the West Indies. In 1691, the Lords Proprietary set aside the northern half of their territory as the district colony of North Carolina. In 1729, the North and South Carolinians rejected the control by the Lords Proprietary. The Carolinians demanded and received a crown takeover. Thereafter, the king appointed their governors who had to cooperate with elected assemblies in each colony. So the people of North and South Carolina, they get tired of these lords ruling over them, so they appeal to be made a colony just like all of the other ones by the crown, and they get it. The king, he decides that the Carolinas should be a colony just like all the rest. So he kind of intercedes, he takes over for these Lords Proprietary who were essentially treating them like they were all renting from them, and instead of running it like that, they decide to run it like a colony just like all the others. James Oglethorpe establishes Georgia. In 1732, Georgia began as a proprietary colony intended to protect South Carolina against Spanish Florida. Led by James Oglethorpe, the Georgia trustees designed their colony as a haven for English debtors who had been jailed because they could not pay their debts. Yet most of Georgia's first colonists were poor English traders and artisans, or religious refugees from Switzerland and Germany. So this starts off as a place for these people that have a lot of debt back in England, and they can come here and try to work off some of their debt. That was the idea, but most of Georgia's first inhabitants were poor traders, artisans, and religious refugees. Oglethorpe set strict rules for colonists. They could not drink alcohol, and they could not own slaves. Georgia's colonists had to work their own land and could therefore not own large plantations. You're not going to have a big, huge plantation if you have to work it all yourself. If you can't have slaves, well, then you're going to have a much smaller amount of land because it's just too much for just you and your family to do. These restrictions angered the colonists, who protested until the trustees surrendered to the crown. Georgia became a royal colony in 1752. So 1752, that's whenever they go from a proprietary colony, which means it's owned by like one person, or in North and South Carolina's case, it was the Lords Proprietary. They become a proprietary colony. This James Oglethorpe, he essentially owns it, and he wants to run it as a place where there's no alcohol, there's no slavery, and the colonists who live there, they don't like this and they protest, and essentially the same thing happens. The king comes in and he essentially takes over Georgia and removes those two rules. Now they can drink alcohol there and they can own slaves. Okay guys, that's it for this video. Once again, if you have any questions, you know how to get a hold of me, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have. So I hope everybody's having a great day, and I'll see you again real soon. Take care.